Okay.
Shall we begin, Rabbi?
You ready?
Yep, we're ready.
Okay, let's go. We're going to do the prayer for the Torah study. Are you ready?
Okay.
Yeah.
Together.
Baruch
Ruth,
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher tirshanu mitzvotav
V'tzivanu also divrei Torah.
Blessed are you,
Adonai,
our God, ruler of the world.
who has sanctified
Sanctified us with your commandments
and command us to engage in the words of
the Torah.
Amen. Good morning, everyone. We are on page 122, and we're talking today about medicine, about biblical medicine. And in Harvey Field's compilation, he counts Tazria Mitzora as one parsha. And because we had this year 2 months of Adar, you have our actual parsha is only Tazria. Does everybody understand what I just said? So
What does Tazria mean?
So normally there's 2 parshas that are combined, Tazria and Mitzora. Both Tazria and Mitzora refer to certain types of skin diseases, but this year, because we had an extra month put in Adar, there's Adar 1 and Adar 2 that we just passed through. Purim is in one of the Adars. That therefore our parsha this week is only Tazria. So why is this important? Maybe it's not, but I just wanted you to know. So if you come this Friday or Saturday, we have a Saturday service as well this week. We might mention or read from Tazria, but he mixes the 2 together, so we don't have any choice but to follow his system, which is true most years. Okay, so we're opening a clinic at the temple for biblical medicine. It's a fundraiser, and so instead of going to one of those quacky MDs, you can go to get treated according to biblical principles. Okay, and save money. So we're opening next week, and we're hoping for a big crowd. We're hoping that all of you will support this effort, and we do a lot of dermatology. So we do less internal medicine because the Bible doesn't know much about internal medicine. But being serious, the Torah goes into a lot of depth here about mostly skin diseases, leprosy in particular. And it's seen as a spiritual ailment as well as a physical ailment. But whatever it was, Jews in medicine have a very long history. And excuse my allergies. And well, and so throughout the Middle Ages and into the modern period, Jews were very interested in medicine. Many of the great rabbis were doctors. Marcia, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. So we're going to look at the connection between ritual and ethics in terms of biblical medicine. Comments? Yes, Evelyn.
My feeling as I read and completed the article was that the priests were not so much concerned with the physical ailment and curing it per se as to how it affected the purity of the sanctuary. That was their main goal in making sure that those that they considered unclean did not contaminate anything in
Oh.
the sanctuary.
Excellent point. I mean, the priests are interested in priestly things, which was the temple or the tabernacle in this case, and that's what they're mainly concerned with. They're not concerned with the individual. So we're not really trying to cure people as much as we are to keep the sanctuary pure. So, that might be good for the people of Israel, but it might not be good for the person who's involved. Okay, Pam.
Well, when did Judaism start putting the people first?
Mhm. With Reform Judaism, I guess.
It took a long time. It took a long time.
And that's really a good point because I think traditional Judaism does not put the individual first. I mean, this is a big topic, individualism in religion. But I think modern religion is basically, well, we want to present a religion that will be meaningful for the individual because otherwise they won't be interested, right? As we see in the West Valley with possibly 16,000 Jews and only a few hundred involved. So these are people that, why are those 2 or 3 or 400 involved and the other 16,000 not? That mostly because of their backgrounds, they see religion as something important in their lives. Very rarely does somebody pop up who had not much background and say, "Oh, I want to be involved." And so, since most people don't have background, then it just stays the way it is. Um, but but traditional Judaism places the people of Israel and especially God first. So the individual has a whole set of obligations that they have to be part, they have to do the right thing, and it's really not about what makes meaningful for them. Yes, Evelyn.
Uh, this may have been true before the destruction of the temples, but after the destruction of the temples in the diaspora, where people were dispersed, there was less emphasis on that aspect of it and more on perhaps not the individual, but more tribalism, more the immediate community per se. And so I guess even if there were synagogues in the first, second, third, fourth century, whatever it was, I don't think you had quite the same emphasis as you did here in the era of both temples as such.
Okay, I agree. I agree. Um, and so, we'll see if there's anything in this that is useful for us today. I mean, this may be what they call an anachronistic subject, right? So if you're an Orthodox Jew, everything in the Torah is meaningful by definition. But as Reform Jews, parts of it are meaningful and parts of it are anachronistic, meaning that that they may have been useful before, but not necessarily now. And so we've made a decision, I think. Lily is trying to see who's here today.
She's looking at you.
Uh,
Yeah,
but
just taking a count.
Mhm.
uh, so we'll have to see, what the subject says and how if any of you can come up with a connection between what is in this parsha and meaning for today. Donna, comment?
No, I was just saying a cute pup.
Ah, yes, well, and she's very interested in Torah study, so that's good.
Obviously.
Okay, who'd like to start
Gonna
reading?
get a rash or something and she needs
Uh, yeah, she wants to know what to do if she has a rash. Do I have a volunteer to read?
Okay, I'll start.
Okay, thank you, Evan.
Yay, Evelyn.
Yeah. Biblical medicine, ritual, and ethics. Parsha,
Hey, where are we?
122.
22, top of the page.
Oh, a little bit down, on the left side.
Yep.
Okay. Parsha Tazria Metzora presents us with what seems like a discussion of skin diseases and bodily infections. We are told that upon finding a swelling, rash, or discoloration on the skin that results in a scaly infection, a person is to report the problem to the priest. This is also to be done if a person notices loss of hair, fungus on clothing, or mold on the walls of a home. All of these signs of tsarat, a variety of skin diseases, are being considered tamei, unclean or impure. The same applies to a person whose sexual organs are infected. In all these situations, waiting periods of healing are prescribed, as are ritual offerings at the sanctuary after one has been cured and pronounced clean.
Okay. So as Evelyn and Pam already made reference to, much of the emphasis here is on the actual sanctuary that has to stay clean. And for that to stay clean, you have to have the people that are coming into it stay clean. And so, and clean doesn't mean you have to take a shower. It's a spiritual state. And Mary Douglas, if you're interested, there's a anthropologist, long deceased, but very important, Mary Douglas, who wrote a lot about purity and impurity, cleanliness and incleanliness, and specifically a lot of her work deals with Leviticus. So she looks at Leviticus from an anthropological point of view. What are these priests trying to accomplish? And they're making certain categories, very theoretical categories. Also, I mentioned him last week, but Jacob Milgram has written several books on Leviticus, and he also talks about, what are they trying to accomplish with these categories? Okay, Evelyn, you can keep going unless there's any other comments. Okay, Pam.
I just had a question. Who had the knowledge in order to say who was clean and unclean? Who had the medical knowledge?
Well, I don't know if we call it medical knowledge. It's really priestly knowledge, but it was the priests. They were the ones that made the decisions on things. And, so they would determine what would happen.
So,
Some
I mean,
people might voluntarily just identify themselves, but the priest would make the final determination about
okay,
things.
so they had the
aside.
training.
Well, yeah, but not medical training as we understand it, but yes.
Okay.
Sai.
I always get the impression that there's a power play here. This is very political on the part of the priests, because as long as they're calling the shots, so to speak, they're controlling the situation. So they in turn can make any rules and regulations they want in order to be in charge. And I guess it's important that they always be in charge, so to speak.
Right.
Once they stop the rules and regulations, they're no longer in charge of the situation. It's kind of a circle. So the more rules they have, the more they're in charge.
Correct. And so your point being that there's a lot of politics
Well,
involved?
a lot of politics.
And does that surprise you, Sai?
And not really, no.
Where do you think we got it?
Absolutely.
And and I didn't realize this when I decided I want to be a rabbi. I didn't realize I was becoming a politician. But that's what it is, right? Marcia.
Probably gonna be a politician no matter what your path in life.
Okay, so everything, whether you're in banking or medicine or law or nursing or teaching, it's all politics. everywhere you go, there's
It's
politics.
the way you treat people and want them to treat you, and the way, interaction with people, it just gets more complicated.
There's always people who want to be in charge.
What is that?
People have agendas. Those agendas can be legitimate. Like I honestly believe that, turning the whole country communist will help everyone, or it could be, kind of deceptive and malicious. I want to turn the whole country communist so that I can have ultimate power. But either way, people have agendas.
Right.
And whether those agendas are well-meaning or not may not matter. If you don't fit into their agenda, they may try to crush you. So the fact that a lot of that is seen here is not surprising. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Kohanim were being deceptive or trying to do something bad. They may have believed very much in what they were doing. Okay, Evelyn?
Okay. In these chapters of Leviticus, we have an important view of ancient medicine and ritual. The priest functions not only in his religious role, but also as a kind of diagnostician. As modern biblical scholar Baruch A. Levine notes, the priest combined medical and ritual procedures in safeguarding the purity of the sanctuary and of the Israelite community, which was threatened by incidents of disease. He instructed the populace and was responsible for enforcing the prescribed procedures. Most Torah
So you're accomplishing two things at once. You're preserving purity, ritual purity, but you're also suppressing the spread of disease. Now, how intentional was that? We don't really know. The same discussion could be had, and we don't want to do that today because we've done it elsewhere, or we will do it elsewhere, about kosher laws. Kosher laws are for religious reasons, but they may also prevent a disease like trichinosis in pork and so forth, but that wasn't the primary purpose or the only purpose. So here too, by isolating certain people who had infectious rashes and things like that, I think they made reference to sexually transmitted diseases. So by isolating those people, you prevent them from spreading it, and that's a good thing as well. But it may not be the main point. Evelyn.
I think this carried through the Middle Ages. I remember when we was just studying medieval history, high school, college, who remembers? Anyway, the point is, though, that when the Black Plague came through these various communities, the Jews, by and large, did not suffer quite the same loss as the others because of their rules and laws of cleanliness in terms of food, disposal of waste, personal cleanliness. And so it seems as if, from the various stories I heard, that these edicts that were promulgated at that point and carried through to the Middle Ages did help some of them. Of course, they were persecuted and killed anyway, but not by necessarily the Black Plague as such.
And specifically the Al Nitilat Yadayim, the ritual where you are obligated to wash your hands before you do the blessings over the Hamotzi. In Reform Judaism, we don't do that. So if the bird flu spreads, we may be more susceptible than the Orthodox. Right, that was a joke. but
Yeah,
but
running water.
but in traditional Judaism, before you eat, you would wash your hands, using that a pitcher, you 3 times over the right, 3 times over the left. Then you don't talk. Then you do the Hamotzi Lechem in Haaretz blessing, and then you eat bread, and then you have lunch or dinner. By doing that, of course, in a situation where there's a plague, you are washing even though you're not obligated to use soap, you still are washing off a lot of the potential germs. But that wasn't the purpose, but it was a good byproduct.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Okay, more. Most Torah interpreters through the ages, however, have not considered these chapters about skin infection to be a collection of medical instructions. Priests prescribe rituals. They do not dispense treatments or medication. Even the use of quarantine regulations show very little regard for guaranteed public health. They are more a form of ritual than a meaning of isolating sick people. For instance, there is no mention of preventing healthy people from contact with the contents of a house where disease has been discovered. If, as most interpreters suggest, these commandments have to do with infections are not strictly medical instructions, then what significance did they have to the people of Israel?
And you could ask the question, what significance do they have to the Kohanim? So the Kohanim are an elite group. They're in the temple or in the tabernacle. They're not your average Israelite. So the Kohanim may have had a whole system of purity that many Israelites may not have cared about or understood, but the priests are still going to enforce it. So I would change that. What significance did it have for the Kohanim? But that's just me. Sai, comments at this point? Okay, Marcia?
Do you think they basically were just almost like trying to protect themselves as opposed to,
Ah, well, the Kohanim are in that, in the temple or in the tabernacle, in the sanctuary. So if you can keep people with diseases out, it protects the Kohanim. Wow,
or
very good. So I hate we're
Kind of-
sounding so cynical
I
about
was going to
it.
say, it sounds very cynical.
Yeah, but I think that's truthful. They're protecting themselves too.
Of course.
Yes. Wow, that's really something. Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay, the ancients were undoubtedly baffled by skin diseases. Swellings, rashes, boils, and skin discolorations must have frightened and bewildered them. So did molds and fungi on the walls of homes or infections associated with sexual organs. Often they watch these symptoms progress into terminal diseases. Knowing little about the cause or treatment of such infections, they concluded that they must be the result of God's displeasure and that they endangered both the individual infected and the community. That may explain why those diagnosed with such infections or those whose homes were discovered with a threatening fungus were labeled unclean and isolated from the rest of the community. In ancient times, such people were considered, excuse me, cursed by God and impure. Touching them or anything that they may have touched could spread the curse to others.
Oh, wow. So you better be careful before you buy a home. If you get a home that has fungus on a wall, you could get ostracized. And really, the fungus on those walls are quite dangerous, right?
To this day, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Sai.
I was just curious as to how other civilizations at the time were handling situations such as these. You know, for example, what were the Greeks doing, and did the Hebrews, if you will, learn something from the Greeks or any other groups around them at that time? These are things we really don't know.
No, but the Greeks and the Romans both had access to water and great emphasis on bathing and personal physical cleanliness, which must have done a great deal to prevent the spread of illnesses. Whereas the Hebrews were living in the desert, a lack of water, and so they must have had much more in the way of skin afflictions than perhaps the Greeks or the Romans.
Well, you could sort of research
Marcia.
the Egyptians and to see to see what their health situation was at the time, to find
I think they-
anything.
I think they landed on the skin issues because it's visible. You know, other illnesses are inside your body and you have other symptoms, but it's so obvious when you have some sort of a skin issue. If you watch TV today, it's like 90% of the ads are medications for psoriasis. You know? And that seems to be a blight upon the world again now. I don't know why.
What is psoriasis?
What?
What is psoriasis?
A skin disease or
Skin
something.
disease.
Disease.
And I see all these things, they're all psoriasis. They got 60 different medications for psoriasis. Yeah, I didn't know it was that, you know, such a, you know, all encompassing kind of disease. But anyway, it's obvious to see it. You know, other kinds of diseases you don't see, but this is evident, you know, it just, there it is on your face, on your arm, whatever it is, you know. And so that's something they could do, you know, hone in on, I suppose, you know. And you could identify easily when somebody has something like this, you know. And I don't know if it matters, but you know, it's a disease. It's not arthritis. It's not an infection that's an internal infection or something like that, where you go into your tent and you just bowled over with a tummy ache or something like that. It's very self-evident walking around in the community, and I guess that leprosy must have been a big,
That was a big problem.
big
Yeah,
problem at the time, and so you know.
yeah. And again, until antibiotics came in, recently it was a problem throughout the entire world.
I think even up until the beginning of the 20th century, probably.
Yeah, yeah. My question is, what did the priest do to ensure that someone who had a sexually transmitted disease didn't enter the sanctuary? Did they have them disrobe? I mean, you're getting to the point where it's almost ludicrous, these restrictions.
Yeah, well, I guess
I'm visualizing this.
some of these things had to be self-reported.
Well, they relied on the honesty of the individual then.
Yeah, well, you had no choice. As you describe it, you can't really you can't do an examination of each person. Mhm. And remember, we're not sure to what degree these things were enforced or even written at the time. You know, they may have been written hundreds of years later. You know, so the whole thing may be a theoretical construction of what should have happened.
Right.
But okay, anyone else? Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
That may explain why those diagnosed with such infections or those whose homes were discovered with the threatening fungus were labeled unclean and isolated from the rest of the community. In ancient times, such people were considered cursed by God and impure. Touching them or anything that they may have touched could spread the curse to others. The important matter here, however, was not only looking for signs that the infected person had been cured, but guaranteeing the community that the curse would not doom everyone. For that reason, priests not only examined the infected person or home, but they also conducted special rituals in the sanctuary celebrating the end of the infection. Their medical ritual procedures were meant not only to provide some elementary sanitary safety for the community, but more significantly, to save the community from spreading among them what they understood as God's curse.
Okay, comments, Marcia?
I'm confused when I'm thinking as she's reading. They were living in tents. They were moving with the tents across the desert. How long did they stay anywhere? How did they get fungus on the wall? This is a craziness already.
Well, because this was written later when they were
I
living.
know it was written later, so it's not applying. I always have trouble with where it is in
And
the
when it is.
years, what
Yeah,
years
where it is in the
happening,
timeline.
you know?
Yeah, and
You have
this is-
trouble too, Pam?
Yeah, the timeline.
The timeline is, it screws me up, and I know the rabbi keeps saying, but
And that's why if you want to read a good book that Jill gave me from our adult education courses is Why the Bible Began. Not how the Bible, why the Bible began. I have it in my car. I can get it to show you. It's about 500 pages, but it's really excellent. It's by a guy named Jacob Wright, Wright, from Emory University. And he goes through, parallels what was happening in the Torah according to the Torah's account, but then also when it was actually written and what was going on at the time it was written. So the two are completely different. So it's
Right.
kind of complicated because you have to keep in mind, he reconstructs as best as possible when these things were written. So, in a given case, something may have been written at the time of the Babylonian exile, 586 BCE. And he says, well, they're writing about, something that happened 500 or 600 years before, but what was happening at the time that they wrote it was that, they needed to reinforce certain concepts. So that's what makes the Bible so complicated. You have the people who wrote it, who you don't know who they are, writing about a certain time that is not visible in the text. And then you think you're hearing about something that happened in the 12th century, 13th century BCE, but they're really talking about the 5th or 6th century BCE. So there's two entirely different scenarios playing out in the one text.
remind me, where are we at this point in Torah that, let's say that year-wise?
The Bible says that it's about the wanderings in the desert, which is around 1250 BCE, or
Okay.
about 3,200 years ago. But really, it was written maybe around 500 and something BCE. So it was written maybe 700 years after when it was supposed to have been written.
So they
And
were
the
were they in
conditions were, huh?
Yeah. So they were in a city, let's say in in
The
Israel.
Israelites were always in Canaan. They were never wandering in the desert. The whole story
Thank
wandering
you
in the
so much.
desert, the whole story wandering in the desert was mostly made up.
Really?
See?
Wow.
Wow.
But it's very important
And
religiously.
which negates
because-
Passover.
All right, let's not
Not go
carry
back.
the implications of this
So
too
confused.
far. But
Okay.
but we have what's historical, what actually was happening, and we have what the Torah says is happening. They're both important. They both reflect a different reality, if you will. But in order to really understand what's going on in the Torah, you have to understand who actually was writing it at what time and what they were worried about, which was a completely different set of things that it would appear from the text. So you have a lot of things going on that are complicated.
Yeah.
You're messing my mind up.
He's really got us
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
Evelyn, back to you.
I don't know.
Bottom of page 122.
Okay.
Because the diagnosis of such infections and celebrating their conclusion affected everyone in the community, the services of priests had to be accessible, and the cost of sanctuary offerings had to be affordable to everyone. Essentially, public need necessitated ethical and economic fairness. If the offerings required by the infected person could not be brought to the sanctuary because they were not affordable, the entire community might suffer a continuing curse. For that reason, the Torah commands that if a person is poor, and cannot afford to bring birds, lambs, hyssop, cedar wood, crimson stuff, choice flour, and oil as offerings for the altar of the sanctuary, 1 lamb, 1/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in, and 2 turtle doves or pigeons within his means may be acceptably substituted. In this way, the poor were made equal to those who could afford the medical ritual procedures required. This reduction in the cost of offerings for the poor is mentioned several times in the Torah. The Torah identifies 6 categories of wrongdoing for which individuals were to bring offerings to the sanctuary. 1, a person who swears he has testimony to give but does not. 2, a person who promises to do a certain thing but does not. 3, a ritually unclean person who takes something forbidden. Or 4, who enters the sanctuary. 5, a woman in labor who swears that she will never again have intercourse with her husband. And 6, a person who suffers from a skin disease because of slandering others.
Okay.
Can we talk about 5?
Sure, Pam, what would you like to say?
Well, first, where did that come from? I mean, is this a big deal in Judaism?
Um, who'd like to respond?
I never heard of this one before. Is this something
Well,
with the Orthodox or?
Well, the 6 ones are wrongdoings, things that you're not supposed to do that require an offering to be brought. So when you marry, you can both the husband and wife commit to certain obligations, including sexual ones. So if one party refuses to have sex ever again, that would, endanger the marital bond. Does that explain it, Pam?
I guess so.
It's only in
No?
one direction if they don't mention the other way.
Yes.
Yeah, why they don't
Good-
mention
good
the other
point,
way, I don't know,
Marcia.
but elsewhere they do, maybe not in the Bible, but in the Talmud,
Yeah.
if a man refuses to have sex with his wife, that's grounds for her to divorce him. Um,
Interesting. Okay. I'll leave it at
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
because you could easily have a situation where the guy has a girlfriend somewhere, and then the wife is sitting at home bored, and she's like, this can't go on like this. And so she can get a divorce just based on the fact that her husband's unwilling or unable to ever have sex with her. And in fact, in the Talmud, they talk about this quite extensively, and they give the minimum number of sex that a man has to give his wife, depending on profession. So a sailor only has to have sex with his wife like once a year because he's on the boat most of the time. He's far away, So it depends on what your job was and how often you were around. Um, but all 6. What do you think of all 6 of these things?
Well, if a person swears to give testimony and does not, who is to say? Is this in a court of law where the person said he would testify against or for someone and did not? Is that
Yes,
the
yes.
stance?
So there's a police investigation. They didn't really have police exactly like that, but there's an investigation. The witness says, "Yeah, I saw, so and so murder all those people downtown Los Angeles." And then when they call him to the stand, he says, "I don't remember anything." Or I saw the Prime Minister of Israel take all that money from the businessman, And then when they call him up, they said, I don't remember. I was confused. So in these cases, this is violating this. And number two, a person who promises to do something but does not. I promised to get photocopies for Marcia to explain to her something in the Bible, and then I don't do it. Now, of course, the details of it would have to be worked out. In the Talmud, it would say Marcia has to remind me 3 times or something like that. And, she has to send me an email and a text and a phone call. And then if I still don't do it, then I get zapped. But and look at number 4.
Yeah, does number 4 mean only the priest can go into the sanctuary?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, no, I think only the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies, which is like a little restricted spot. But I guess only certain people could go into the sanctuary, period. Maybe that was only the priests.
That was the whole issue our last week's Torah reading about these sons of Aaron who went in when they shouldn't have gone in.
Oh, yeah. They paid
But
the
they
penalty.
also offered incense sacrifice. They did a ritual in there.
Right.
It wasn't just that they entered,
Ah,
but they were priests, so they had the right to enter, I guess. But I guess most of you wouldn't be allowed to enter the sanctuary at all.
and you who
Yes,
are Kohen could go in, right?
yeah, I'm a Cohen, so I could go in.
What is a ritually unclean person?
Well, ritually unclean person is basically what we're talking about. Like, let's say
Understand.
you
But-
have a skin disease.
Okay,
That would make you ritually impure. Also in the Talmud, there's if you've had sex, then you have to go to a mikveh. If you're a woman with having a period, if you've been into a cemetery.
Mhm.
So in all these cases, you have to wait, or at least in some of the cases, you have to wait a period of time. And in all the cases, you have to go to a mikveh to immerse yourself completely, and that purifies you. So there was a process to become purified after impurities.
Well,
Now, so this is, if I can just, and then Pam and then Evelyn, as a Kohen, I'm not allowed to go into a cemetery because dead bodies are supposed to convey impurity. Now, so you could say, well, you could go to the cemetery and then go to a mikveh, but that's not how the Talmud says. You shouldn't deliberately make yourself impure. But since there's no temple, there's nothing for me to do as a Kohen anyway. But that doesn't matter. These laws are still regarded as operative. So, okay, Pam and then Evelyn.
Well, are Kohens the only ones that are not allowed to go there?
Coins are the only ones, I believe. Levites are allowed, I believe.
Okay.
well,
Evelyn and then Cy.
there is the residual of this when we attend the funeral of a friend, let's say,
Oh,
at Sunland. There are bottles of water that are placed there or in front of the house of the deceased before you enter it. And you're
right.
expected to ritually wash your hands.
Yeah.
You may just pour a little bit of water over you, but I think it is probably the remnants of what used to be a mikveh, shall we say.
Right.
And
Well, and in the Talmud, you're required to wash the right hand 3 times and the left hand 3 times. It's a ritual wash, so you're not supposed to take a shower. But as Pam pointed out, in the context of a plague, even washing your hands might do a lot of good. So in a house of mourning, you're supposed to bring food for the family and in order to be together. And so by washing your hands after the cemetery, now in a medieval context, you would be touching the dead body, right? Somebody have to bury the person. There's no sunland in the 1200s or 1300s, right? So people, and how we have the funeral of the coffin bearers, there's like 6 people assigned to carry the coffin. Well, they didn't have a coffin. They put the body in a bag, and 6 people, or however many number of people, would carry the body and then bury the body. So you could see how important it would be to wash your hands afterwards, because if the person died of plague, you could spread by eating without washing. You could infect yourself and die potentially, right? And if you're preparing the food, you could infect everyone else. So the washing became very important. Was that the primary purpose? No. Did these ancient biblical writers know about health considerations of this sort? Maybe, maybe they just got lucky. Sometimes what ritual is designed to do and what medicine is designed to do is similar. So it could just be kind of an overlap. Sai.
It reads here that the punishment for performing any of those acts is to bring an offering to the temple. I don't quite understand that. I thought bringing an offering was a good thing.
Well, there are different types of sacrifices. So there's sacrifices for wrongdoing. So if you did something wrong, okay, Sai, you get stopped by the police and they say, were you driving 104 miles in a little road in Sun City Grand? And you would say no. But we know that this is not true. So later you would bring a sacrifice to God to expiate your lie. So this would be one type of sacrifice. Response, Sai?
I think you're reaching a little bit.
All right, well, that's my job. I try to reach.
Uh,
I'm trying to
Diplomatically
reach.
said, Si.
All right, it's a tight wire or a high wire act. We're trying to we're trying to defend various positions at the same time. Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay, for such wrongdoing, special offerings were required. Yet in each situation, the Torah provides against financial discrimination. If the person who sinned is poor and cannot afford the offerings required, special provisions are made. Other less expensive sacrifices are substituted and are acceptable. The guiding principle of Jewish ethics, whether in the area of ritual or medicine, is equal treatment for the poor and rich. Each human being is created in God's image. The offerings of each person, rich or poor, are of equal value to God. Now,
Okay, Harvey Fields is reaching here. Yes, Evelyn.
I was just going to say, did the priest know, whoever was offering this particular sacrifice, whether they were rich or they were poor? How did they determine that? What if someone rich decided to be cheap about the whole thing? How did you prove that he was not?
They had a committee of 3 that you had to submit your tax forms to. And no, seriously, in Jerusalem, where we presume that this was written, there was a very heightened division between rich and poor. So the rich people had big houses, the poor did not. So for locals, it was not that hard to figure out who was who. For people coming from outside of Jerusalem or even outside of the country, then it was more hard. So in the New Testament, for example, there's a story about this guy. He's a Jewish guy, and he's a Kohen, and he's very wealthy, and he lives in Cyprus. So he comes all the way from Cyprus, not that far, but it's far. It's not in Israel, to for one of the three pilgrimage festivals, and he wants to not only offer sacrifice, but he wants to serve just for a few weeks as a priest in the temple. Well, the priests in the temple don't let him. They said, "You don't live in Israel, and therefore you're not eligible to serve as a Kohen," even though he was a Kohen. Now, he self-identified as wealthy, so he wants to bring a big sacrifice because he has money. So a lot of it was that people who were wealthier presumably wanted to bring a bigger sacrifice. Now, depending on the type of sacrifice, right? Size question brought out that there's different sacrifices that are for different purposes. But so you bring a sacrifice for Passover, let's say, and that's different than bringing a sacrifice for wrongdoing. It's a different type of sacrifice, different rules completely. But let's say in a Passover sacrifice, you bring a whole big cow, you get most of that meat back. So the Kohanim take some, some of it's burnt for God, but most of it comes back to you. So it's like with a lot of things, is that the rich can pay more, but somehow most of it comes back to them in the end. Marcia, Steve, comments?
Swimming.
Things haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay, the poor belong to God. The poor are called the people of God, as the sages expounded. If you lend money to any of my people, who are my people? They are the poor, as it is said, for the Eternal has comforted the people and has compassion upon the poor among them. At times, a person who is rich does not pay attention to poor relatives. However, this is not so with God. God cares for the poor. The proof of this is what Isaiah had said, "The Eternal has founded the city of Zion, and in her the poor of God's people take refuge."
Question,
Okay, comments?
question.
Yes, Pam.
Yeah. Is Reform Judaism doing enough for the poor? 'Cause you
No,
don't hear
of
much
course,
about it.
no, of course not.
Yeah.
But don't blame me.
Well, I mean,
Steve,
do you think we should be
we
stepping
have
up?
here, right here, Steve has done more than anyone in our temple to help people who are unfortunate. But
Right.
it's hard. It's
It is,
hard. We
it is,
explain, give her the 2-minute version of what we've done and why it's difficult.
well, one case example is, we had a large menorah in the sanctuary, in the lobby, and we were going to adopt families for the Christmas and Hanukkah holidays. So we contacted Jewish Family and Children's Services. They gave us a list of 5 names or families, and of those 5, we adopted 3. So, but there were specific things that these families wanted. And a lot of times we, as a congregation, couldn't afford, therefore, some of those items were not purchased or given. And there was no way to make that up other than redoing it again the following year. So that's the way I look at it.
And what would you say is the barriers to
Money,
doing more?
money. How much can you afford to give to others?
But it's also about motivation, isn't it?
Well, of course, motivation is 90% of it, but you know, you have some people that just don't want to give.
And why don't they want to give?
That's a very, very good question. I don't have an answer to that.
But I guess my answer would be that um, on one hand, according to Maimonides' hierarchy of charity, it's better if it's done anonymously.
True.
But from another point of view, you're much more likely to give to people you know. If I have neighbors that I'm really close with who have been really nice to me, and I see personally how they're struggling economically, I'm more likely to help them because they're people I know well and I care about, and I've eaten with them, and I've seen, partly because I'm emotionally connected and partly because I've observed personally their struggles. If it's an anonymous family or families, or you're just giving to an organization, you have no idea what that money's going for, whether it's warranted, who the people are that are getting it. Of course, in how much of the $100 would go to the organizational, the rent for their building and the salaries, So there's a lot of unknowns, So. I think in the old days when it was, charity was much more personal and in a small context, and you were much more aware what was going on, it was easier. Today it's all abstract, so
Yeah.
it's very hard. Steve and then Evelyn.
Okay, one other case in point is, with the can-do item for the month, we have had great success with that. And in your comment, Rabbi, and the fact that, you're giving it, anonymously, therefore, you don't have to worry about how much you put in, because typically nobody sees what you're putting into the box. So I think that kind of is relevant.
So it can work both ways. Giving anonymously under certain circumstances can actually promote greater giving. In other circumstances, it can be an impediment to giving sufficient amounts.
Correct.
Yes, Evelyn or Cy or who else would like to speak?
Evelyn, I
Donna?
think, was next.
Evelyn.
Okay, my father used to have an expression that charity begins at home.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and however, when he came, my father was an immigrant. I'm a first generation American. And when he came over, those Haverim, those whom he knew, cousins, relatives, and townspeople, Landslight, as they used to call them, formed an organization, a benevolent society, which they contributed to. And those members in that group, dues were collected. If anyone in that particular group that they knew who all the individuals were, if anyone needed help, assistance of one sort or another, the money went to that, and a committee decided how much and who, whatever. And so this was, I guess, tribalism on a small scale, in effect. But your point, Rabbi, was that it was easier to give to people that they knew specifically who had great need. It was easier to give than to give anonymously. It didn't make sense for them to just give money, not know where it went for, what it went for. Better to give it to someone you know who has a specific need. And yes, I guess it works both ways, but this was how my father felt, and this is personally how I think I continue to feel as well. So it's takes all kinds, as they say.
Mhm.
Okay, Donna, Shirley, Cy,
Do you think,
Marcia.
maybe, Steve, that you say that the wish for the holiday on that was excessive?
Well, I mean, you have the choice of whatever you wanted to purchase from that list. You didn't have to,
Oh, okay, so the
completely,
list,
address every single item or purchase every single
but I'm
item.
saying was the list an overreach that people?
Well, people ask for, like, one family asked for a bicycle. Okay, so, and it wasn't given to them because it was unaffordable to that particular family. So that it had adopted this particular group. But, but they were able to purchase some things like clothing, and other things that were on their list. But yes, I think in some ways, Marcia, you're correct.
Hmm.
Sometimes, the askers should have been aware that it wasn't, a bottomless pit,
Right. But
But I
then,
guess they figured, you asked,
why not ask for the world and get whatever you can get from it?
right. I can understand that, yeah.
So that's where I was at.
Right.
Okay. Evelyn, back to you.
Okay. In his commentary on Leviticus, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch explains the reason for making these offerings of the poor affordable. The poverty-stricken and suffering people, he writes, often presume that they have been forsaken by God's care, abandoned by God. As a result, they abandon themselves they give themselves up to despair, lose self-respect. They fall because they have given up all thoughts of betterment. In commanding that the offerings be made affordable to the poor, the Torah demonstrates that the poor are as important to God as the rich. They and the offerings are equally sacred and acceptable. God has not forsaken them. Commenting on charitable gifts of the poor, Rabbi Hillel Silverman draws a parallel to the offerings once given in the sanctuary. Every Jew is enjoined to contribute offerings according to his or her individual means. The wealthy bring more, the poor bring what they can. In the words of the Talmud, but one and the same are the generous and the meager offering, provided that a person's intention and sincerity are directed to God. We should understand that the small gift of the less affluent person may be a far greater sacrifice than the large gift of the wealthy donor. A contribution of time and service given with the Havanah is even more valuable than material gifts.
Okay,
Here,
good.
here.
So what do you think? Steve?
Well, I mean, we all volunteer. I mean, this whole group of Torah study volunteers to do things for the temple, and not only just for the temple, but say, for example, Meals on Wheels. People go out and deliver meals to people that are in need. It's just it is what it is, and I think that people understand that, in order to when you volunteer, you feel something good in yourself, and that is something that God has given to you.
Hmm,
Yeah, well put.
good. Okay, Pam?
I said, well put, for Steve.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you agree?
Yep.
So volunteerism is important and it's a way of giving back to the community. So here it sounds a little Marxist. Every Jew is enjoined to contribute offerings according to his or her individual needs. What was Marx's famous quote? From each according to
Their needs.
Yeah,
His needs.
right. Yeah,
their ability and to each according to their needs.
Mhm.
So a little bit of Marxism is good, as long as you don't take it too far. Is that what Hillel Silverman is saying.
Just a little bit of Marxism.
Who de-
Um,
who determines how far?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, good point.
Now, this is from Samson Raphael Hirsch, the top part, who was a 19th century German Orthodox rabbi, and then Hillel Silverman was a 20th century American conservative rabbi. So both of them are relatively very recent. But when we go back 2,000 years, 2,500 years in Israel, there was tremendous divisions between the ultra wealthy, who was a smaller group, and the ultra poor, that was a much larger group. And these social tensions, socioeconomic tensions, were very, very, very serious and very, very vicious. And in the end led to some of the problems that caused the war against the Romans. So so dealing with income disparity is important, but how do you do that in a fair way? It's very hard. Evelyn.
I'm just thinking of the French Revolution, and you had such a tremendous disparity that society could no longer function. And so you had the poor revolting against the very few extremely wealthy because they were taking everything and giving nothing. The poorer people could barely exist. And when you have that kind of an untenable situation, where the majority of people are worse off, they aren't going to put up with it anymore. and so you get social upheaval as a result.
Well, and you look at what's happened recently. So the president has canceled certain student debts, student loans. So on one hand, this is unjust. Loans are taken freely. You make a commitment, and to just cancel them when other people who paid back their loans didn't get such relief is unfair. On the other hand, there's a sense that a lot of the people that took the loans are in the lower socioeconomic categories, and they simply can't pay them back, and they feel that they've been misled and mistreated. And so this is a way to prevent social extremism of a sense. So depending on how you look at it, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. Stephen, then Evelyn.
Okay, well, I think that even though he's helping these students with their loans, I still think it's a political stunt.
These are
Yes,
people who,
clearly. But do you think that there is an argument to be made that it is helping people who, in other words, could you apply it to what we've read in this week's Harvey Fields?
can I say,
Yeah.
these are people that have been paying for 20 plus years. So one would imagine they put a lot of money already into this, and they may have had obscenely a large interest on their loans at this point. My granddaughter was just paid off her loans, and
Yeah.
she was complaining. She says, I don't think other people should be getting this free because I've been paying all this time and I finally paid it off. She was very happy about it, obviously. And
Mhm.
so, it's a hard question. Yeah.
Evelyn, and then if Steve wants to respond.
Yeah, when these people took out the loan, they signed an obligation to pay it back. They may not have realized when they signed that that was an obligation, but it was one. It was not money free for them. They did have that obligation. And I agree with Marcia in that my grandkids just paid off their loans as well. And there's a great deal of resentment. They worked very hard to pay it off. And the upshot is that these people are getting away with an obligation that they undertook knowingly and therefore are ducking out from a social obligation as such.
But
Okay, so you used a very interesting expression there, social obligation, and you can see in the Torah that this whole week's parsha is based upon a tight society, right? They're supposed to be in the middle of the desert, right? We already established maybe they weren't at the time it was written, but we're talking about a group that's in the middle of the desert. And even though there may be 2 or 3 million people, according to the Torah, they're still dependent upon one another, right? So they're traveling around and they're also dependent upon God. And therefore, there has to be ritual that's done to keep God happy because there's a covenant where we have certain obligations to God. We also have certain obligations to our fellow Jews and to fellow human beings. So there's a very tight sense of social, there's a social contract that is very explicit here. You know, in America today, I'm not sure how many people feel that there's that same sense of obligation to the greater good of the public. So it, I hate to say it, but there's law, but there's also just feelings. You have to feel a connection in order to want the best for everybody. Okay, Marcia, and then if Steve
I'll be
wants to.
fast. There was an 82-year-old lady that just finished paying off her student loans.
Hmm. Wow,
From like 60 years earlier.
Yeah.
wow.
I mean, maybe she went to law school 10 years ago, that would be different. But if we're talking about from when she was college age,
Yeah, but she stuck with it. Wow.
well, she felt, sorry,
yeah, Steve.
she felt obligated to pay off her debt, which,
Yeah.
you know, and I would pay off my debt too. You know, but then again, depending on how much my financial situation is, I don't know if I could pay it off within 20, 30 years, depending on the amount. So, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to maybe somebody helping me.
But if you have a large underclass who are getting more and more resentful and you don't help them in some way, even if it's quote unquote unfair, you could have a revolution on your hands, right? There was the Russian Revolution, there was the all sorts of the French Revolution.
Yes.
So there's certain circumstances where you may have to do things that are not fair in order to keep the underclass from rebelling. So, Evelyn.
No, I was just thinking that when these people do not fulfill their obligations for repaying the loan, who pays for it? The taxpayers wind up paying for it. And so, yes, the debt is spread throughout the entire society. And this is where you will get social discontent from those who already have paid their obligations. And yes, the underclass may be very resentful that they can't do better, but at the same time, you have an upper strata that is also very, very frustrated because it seems as if they pay and pay and pay and are paying for people who they feel may not necessarily deserve to be off the hook as such. And this is why you have an awful lot of discontent in the country at the moment.
Evelyn is going to organize a new terrorist group to try to fight back against perceived
Hey.
wrongs against middle class Jewish people.
Keep
But-
in
but-
mind, we are being recorded, so, and we never know who's listening.
Right.
But on a serious level, that wouldn't happen because it's the poor people who generally have less to lose who are willing to then become revolutionaries, if you will, right? So if you've got a good job and a nice house and 2 dogs, you don't generally just run away to the forest and and give everything up in order to overthrow the government in general. But there's always exceptions. Fidel Castro, for example, was from a upper class household. You know, he had his family had lots of money, and his father treated him like royalty. and that, and he still went literally out into the woods to do a revolution.
Bin
So,
Laden also. Bin Laden was a wealthy man in Saudi
oh
Arabia.
yes, of course, bin Laden was from a very, very, very wealthy Saudi family. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not just the poor that will make revolutions, but I don't think any of the seven of us here today are willing to sacrifice what it would take to make a revolution against the US government. And I'm not sure that it would be beneficial, right? Like uprooting what exists frequently creates more problems than it solves, right? How do you know that revolutionary agitation is going to improve the situation? Psy.
I think that we all have various complaints, and we love to complain to each other. But to me, from a political point of view, is complaining to each other is a complete waste of time. We should be talking to people who represent us. But when was the last time you talked to your congressman or your senator? I'm sure you haven't. And that's where the changes have to occur. And with regards to the loans, uh, if you feel strongly one way or the other, why don't you talk to your congressman? What the president did was an executive thing, which can be changed by the Congress if enough people want it that way. But people don't. They just accept what the government hands them and discuss it amongst themselves.
Okay. Well, I mean, I met the congresswoman uh, two or three times, a couple years ago, and but I didn't make the effort to say anything particularly, specific with her because I didn't think there was much point. In Alabama, I knew the mayor quite well, and the congressman. And in Jamaica, I had met some of the prime ministers. It was a small country, so you just came in contact with the certain people. But they all have their, political things. I mean, even, you know, what would I say that would make any difference? And we're here talking about the poor, so are we serving as advocates for the poor? I mean, what am I going to tell the Jamaican Prime Minister about the poor people of Jamaica that he doesn't already know? But the long-term way to help the poor of Jamaica is to help the economy of the country, and that's really, 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 really hard thing to do. And I haven't, if I was some high-tech guy that I'll say I'll build a high-tech factory in Jamaica and give 500 good jobs, that would perk up his ears. But if I say, well, I'm a rabbi and the Torah says you should help the poor, he'll be like, I know that already. I can't help the poor. Okay, any comments?
Well,
Okay. Pam and then Evelyn.
Well, your job as a rabbi just to steer the rest of us to do the right thing. You don't
Oh,
necessarily have to do it.
So, but what's the right thing? I mean, what's the right thing to just, so we talked about canceling student debt. We're presuming that many of the people who got the cancellations, made bad decisions. They took loans, high loans that they had, high amounts that they had no chance of repaying, that they had no idea what they were doing. They were irresponsible, and that now they just can't pay it back or they don't want to pay it back. No, but B, that many of them came from very low income backgrounds. And so, based on this, you should have some degree of sympathy for people who simply, coming from very poor backgrounds. Not only do they not have economic resources, but they were probably not able to be educated in a smart way, so their parents didn't help them. Not that our parents did. I mean, my parents didn't help me to learn how to use money or give me a lot of practical advice. But, just by their examples, being middle class people, I could copy middle class ways from them. And I was exposed to other middle class, kids at school and so forth. So presumably that helped me in a way that the poor don't get help. So what obligation do we have to the poor? So you're asking me to guide, but it's very hard. What am I supposed to tell people that you should give more money to the poor, that you should, I mean, I saw one thing on a synagogue website. It says, we try to teach in a way where we open up ideas for people, but we don't tell people what to think or to do. And that, if I were to be preachy and every Friday say, you're not giving enough, you need to give more to this specific charities. So give to the United Way and give to the Red Cross and give to the Magen David Adom, those three charities. And Mrs. Schwartz, you only gave $50 last week. I want $100. People would get mad, right? Who the rabbi is that he's bossing us around and telling us what to do. So, or what to think, there's so it's an impossible situation, Evelyn.
Well, we can get into a whole sociological to do about this, but it reminds me of the expression, give a man a fish and you fed him for one meal, teach him how to fish, and he can fish the rest of his life. Part of the problem is that these people who are poor either are poor students or their school system is very poor, does not prepare them for the life in the society as it is. So many of them are graduating, they can barely read and write and compute. And so my feelings are the fault lies with the entire education system in this country that has not prepared all of its citizens to properly function in our society. And that becomes another complex problem. Rather than giving money to a particular charity, the money should be going for teaching schools so that the teachers who graduate are capable of teaching the pupils the skills that they need to function in our society. And so it becomes a much more complex problem than the one that we have been discussing as just giving to the poor or letting the students off the hook. That is just a simplistic answer. The problem is so deep and so entrenched that until we can actually educate our citizens to function in today's current society of technology, then you're always going to have a very poor sub-underclass.
Okay, so what should be my role as the rabbi in such a situation? Am I supposed to urge my congregants to help donate money to this underclass? How do I help the problem of Pam said, is the reform movement doing enough to help the poor? And I felt a twitch of conscience, and I know Steve is doing all he can, but what more, and it's not, it's a little bit, it's symbolic, but it helps. All those cans of food are being eaten and hopefully it's helping. But, what more can we do? I mean, we have to do more, but what are we supposed to do? And what is my role as the rabbi in trying to promote that in a healthy way that isn't going to build resentment, that we've talked about here as well. Pam, can you come up with a solution for me?
No, I just see your role as to inspire and remind.
And am I doing that?
Yes.
Steve, you feel that I'm doing that enough?
Yes, sir, I do believe that you are doing that. Absolutely.
Okay. I feel bad that we don't do more. But Steve is in many ways a one-man show, right? You know, not
Well,
only with,
I do have a committee, but you know, there's little that they do.
all right, but let's take the committee of 4 or 5 people. Those 4 or 5 people are a 5-man or 5-woman, 5 people show. You know, they
Mhm.
don't have broad, deep support among the entire congregation and beyond. You know, so it's just a handful of people doing most of the work, let's say.
Exactly. And
And
then a lot of people get burnt out because, you know, it's
Yeah.
always, the burden is always on them. Therefore, you know, you get burnt out. And what can you do to inspire somebody like that in a situation?
right, and Steve raised the issue of Torah study and that the Brotherhood, which sponsors it, could be more supportive. And they basically told them it's your baby, you know,
Yeah,
don't
well,
look at us.
look who's here. Sai is the only one that is a member of the Brotherhood that is participating, at least in this group.
So
Participating in what?
Well,
in Torah
in
study.
Torah study, because
Oh,
Brotherhood sponsors supposedly started
Torah, that's
sponsors.
true, right, right.
Um, but clearly how to deal with the poor in a way that's helpful for them, but doesn't make them overly expecting handouts perpetually is a very delicate situation. And you have people who are poor who are motivated, and they, in the course of 20 or 30 years, can really, in America, change. You know, they can go to law school or dental school or whatever and become, you know, go from being poor to being upper middle class in the same person. But then there's others, you know, where there's a certain culture of expecting handouts and it just perpetuates the problems. Pam.
I'll pass. We're getting a time limit, so I'll pass.
Yeah,
Okay,
well,
Steve.
I was gonna say we got about 4 minutes left, so we should start concluding our comments.
Okay, so we started talking about the sanctuary and about skin diseases, and then Harvey feels very adroitly
Adroitly,
pivoted. How do you say it?
adroitly,
Adroit,
Adro,
ADR,
adro, ad,
adroitly.
adroitly, yes.
adroitly pivoted and moved the discussion into how we take care of the poor. The way he did that is by saying that there were sacrifices that poor people could bring really small things. So whereas rich family might bring a cow, poor family could bring a little pigeon, something like that. So everybody could get forgiveness and everybody could undo wrongdoing. So you didn't have all these poorer people who could not participate in the ritual and could not feel that God was listening to them.
Mhm.
And so we want the same situation, not only in ritual, but in our society as a whole. But how to achieve that, we weren't able to come up with a definitive solution. We've appointed a one-person committee of Cy Perlis, and in the next 7 days, he's going to write up a plan for solving all the problems of poverty, not just in the US, but throughout the world.
Okay,
Yay.
Okay, Cy?
Give me an extra week.
Okay.
let's-
All right, we turn back to Steve for the final blessing. This
Okay,
is very interesting today.
yeah, it
And
was quite interesting.
Yeah.
Let's conclude then with the blessing, and then Rabbi, if you have any other announcements, you may proceed.
Lily is back with us.
All right. Ready,
Baruch
Lily? Atah Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
natan
natan lanu
lanu
Torah
Torat
emet
emet V'chaye
olam
olam v'tah b'tochenu.
Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai,
Adonai.
Yoteinu Torah.
Torah.
Blessed is
Blessed is
Adonai,
Adonai,
our God,
God,
ruler of the universe, who has given us the
given us
teaching
the
of
teaching
truth,
of truth.
implanting
Granted
within us
us
eternal
eternal
life.
life.
Blessed
Blessed is Adonai,
Adonai,
giver
giver
of
of
the
the Torah.
Torah. Okay, Rabbi, you have some announcements?
No,
Okay,
Saturday services this week if you like.
Yeah.
Friday services this week if you like.
right.
Adult Ed is running the anti-Semitism and Gospels versus Rabbinic Judaism. Anything you would like that we don't do, let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, good discussion,
Thank
everybody.
you. Great discussion, Rabbi. Thank you.
I'd like to
Everyone, good
say
weekend.
I'm
What's
having, I'm having problems with a vertigo problem.
Oh, okay.
Very sleepy. And so I got a lot out of the conversation this day, but I didn't feel like I could contribute because of this horrible sleepiness that I have.
Oh, boy.
Glad you
Anyway,
came.
I
until
hope you
next
feel
week,
better.
I
Glad
will
that you
be better. I'm doing all I can with PT and everything. So
Okay.
thank you.
Take care, everyone.
See
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye.
Feel better.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm stopping.